By the outbreak of the Second World War, so many of the nation's country houses, whether ornate Baroque palaces or picturesque Tudor manor houses, vast neoclassical mansions or battlemented Victorian follies, had been tottering for years under the weight of rising taxes, a dwindling supply of domestic help, and an uncomfortable sense that, as a class, their owners were surplus to requirements, as anachronistic in 20th-century Britain as the rusting suits of armour that decorated their dusty halls. In 1939, the golden age of the country house, with its lavish entertaining and its armies of servants, seemed a distant memory, and in truth a memory that had been burnished by the passage of time until it shone more brightly than it ever had in real life. But on one thing, truth and memory were in agreement. The years since the end of the First World War had been a disaster for the country house. Estates had been broken up. Mansions had been emptied of their contents and demolished. Families who had been at the heart of rural communities for generations had been forced to sell up and move away. The country house was in crisis. It is hard to pinpoint just when the rot set in. Was it with the agricultural depressions of the 1870s and 1880s, or the reform of death duties in the 1890s? Was it the shortage of domestic servants after the First World War, the increase in land taxes and the decline in land values? Or, less tangible but perhaps most significant of all, the growing sense in the 1920s and 1930s that the country house was a monument to an undemocratic past and a way of life that was neither viable nor socially desirable. Whatever the cause, by 1939, hundreds of estates had disappeared, and the mansions which stood at the heart of those estates had been sold. In a single county, Northamptonshire, 30 of the 72 principal country houses standing in 1919 were sold over the next 20 years, several of them more than once. And all too often, houses that couldn't find a buyer were simply demolished. In England alone, nearly 420 mansions were destroyed in the years between the wars. No wonder that in 1944, when Evelyn Waugh wrote Brideshead Revisited, that classic novel of loss, he was convinced, as he said later, that the ancestral seats which were our chief national artistic achievement were doomed to decay and spoliation. Their owners weren't alone in suffering hardships, of course. For most people in Britain, victory over the Axis powers was a bitter pill, bringing with it years of austerity. Around 750,000 new homes were needed in England and Wales alone in 1945, simply to house the existing population. Food shortages became so severe that the new Labour government, which came to power in the summer of 1945, had to introduce temporary bread rationing and potato controls. The wartime restrictions on many goods remained in force for years. Petrol rationing only came to an end in 1950, while controls on meat and bacon would continue for 4 years after that. Britain was poor, and with an average daily intake of only 2,700 calories, it was hungry. There was a boom in the sale of bathroom scales, and at the Open Golf Championships at St Andrews in 1946, England's Henry Cotton blamed his poor performance on a lack of stamina caused by food rationing. But whereas, during the war, an all-in-it-together attitude had prevailed, on the surface at least, the peace brought a renewal of class conflict, and faced with a future that didn't want them and a past that cost too much, country house owners grappled with difficult choices. To sell off a few farms, or that dusty little medieval book of hours in the library that no one has opened for centuries, or the Reynolds of great-great-grandmother hanging on the stairs. To shut up the house for a while, move to somewhere more manageable on the edge of the estate, and hope things would improve, or to give up an ancestral seat which had been in the family for generations and bring in the demolition contractors to salvage what they could from a white elephant that no one wanted. In other words, to stay or to go.